and welcome to the Etsy podcast. I'm your host, Justin McRoberts. This is a podcast through which I am committed to helping you navigate the turbulent waters where the arts and faith, and religion and industry and leadership all intersect. That's why it's called Etsy. Normally, I take a set of questions from Instagram and dig into what you are struggling with instead of just talking about what I'm interested in and hoping it works for you. And this week, I'm actually picking up from the questions I've actually had over Instagram, and a set of questions I've actually been in personally with coaching clients and with friends that I think are actually. I'm realizing that I'm having the same conversation in two different spaces. The one conversation is about the use of AI for productivity. The other conversation is about the use of psilocybin for mental health, spiritual clarity, etc. And I'm going to begin with the massive caveat that I am not wholesale against the use of either artificial intelligence or psilocybin. I'll say it again. I am not wholesale against the use of artificial intelligence or psilocybin. It's really easy, and maybe we're culturally trained to this at this point. It's really easy for us to, when someone says, "I have issues with that," or "I'm hesitant about that," like it's odd how quickly and disappointing how quickly we jump to like, "Oh, well, so you're against it." This whole thing, and I'll actually reference this. This whole thing is actually something I wrote for Substack. I started Substacking. I don't know if people say that, and it pushed to Facebook, and there's this little headline on Facebook about psilocybin and AI and me having concerns. And this gentleman jumped on and said, "Well, you might as well get rid of power tools too, and the entire internet and psych meds." Like homie clearly took a shortcut and didn't read the entire thing. I'm not wholesale against the use of psilocybin and artificial intelligence. I do have concerns about their use, and not just about the effect of their use. I'll say it like this. The primary hang up I have with the way a lot of the ways I'm hearing friends, clients, etc. use AI and psilocybin is a lot of it feels like ways to bypass processes that are harder and slower. The processes that I think are more valuable in and of themselves than the results of those processes. In other words, like, and if you've worked with me as a coach, you know that I'll say this all the time. Like, I don't care all that much about what it is you're trying to accomplish. I care about who you are in your process and who you're becoming as you actually do the work. That's it. That's in me. And I don't think that's just a preference. I think we can talk about the theology of work here, maybe in another podcast. Who I become as I do what I do, I think, is the ballgame. And almost any time I hear about shortcuts, I get nervous that we're bypassing the processes by which the most important thing gets jumped, which is who you are in what you do. I sat with a group of firefighters a few weeks ago, and even talking about firefighting, like who firefighters are as they do the work of firefighting is actually more important than firefighting. I'll go so far as to say that. It's not just about putting out fires. It's about a whole culture designed around response and first response to fires and all kinds of other things. And the women and men who do those jobs, who they are as persons, is far more important than getting there on time. So, because who they are when they arrive matters. In the case of psilocybin use, again, I will reiterate, I'll say this several times, I'm not wholesale against the use of psilocybin. I do think that it's worth taking a real hard look, though, at if I'm approaching psilocybin for the sake of mental clarity or spiritual awakening, I think it's worth investigating what it is I'm actually wanting. In other words, like when I'm talking about spiritual health, mental health, what is it? What am I actually pursuing? This is the way I write it here for the Substack. I think it's worth deeply considering what I'm after when it comes to healing or wholeness or psychological clarity or spiritual knowledge. As I see it, none of these things, including healing and wholeness, is actually about achieving particular goals or getting certain places. They're all about becoming someone. In part, in our processes, we hope to become persons who can be responsible with the results and fruits of our processes. Getting somewhere, achieving something, getting a piece of clarity, having a peace of mind, all that sounds really attractive. But all of that really has to be couched I would suggest, in a grander sense of my personhood. And we'll come back to this. Part of what it means to be a person is a lack of clarity and some pain and some discomfort. So I'll go back to the last piece that in our process towards a goal, part of what I hope for in my process is that I become someone who can be responsible to the results of that process. I think it's entirely possible. It happens all the time that when we take shortcuts and we bypass our processes, we just get to the results and we just get to the answer and we just get to the fruits of the thing. We're not capable of managing those results. We're not capable of maintaining those results. We haven't earned the right to beat it. We know this from things like fad diets. Like, folks will get thin or lose a ton of weight and go from like 255 to 190 pounds and do it really, really quickly. And what tends to happen is when we make that jump and we lose all that weight, if I haven't developed the patterns of someone who lives at 190 pounds, if I'm still living the same, if my life patterns are that of someone who lives at 250, 275, I'm going to keep living the way I did at 275, 250. I haven't become someone who lives at 190. In other words, the way I become someone who lives at 190 is actually like put the time and the energy and the effort in to become that person, not just by losing the weight, but by internal fortitude and the changes of my life patterns and my mentalities. Again, let me step out and say, I totally understand that there are situations and moments in which, like their whole lives in which, like the meds are needed and some sort of like injection of like a powerful tool is entirely responsible, but not most of the time. So the main thing I've heard about psilocybin use has to do with like the power of psilocybin to unlock things in me, unlock memories. There's a whole conversation to be had there about which there's very little research. About the accuracy of these memories and all that kind of stuff. We can talk about that another time. I'm probably not that person, but what I hear is like I'm hearing stories about the power of psilocybin to unlock things in me, mentally, spiritually, etc. And here's why that makes me nervous. It's just a nerve. That's bigger than that. I'm trying not to dismiss my own thoughts and feelings here. It makes me nervous because it is entirely possible to come to a knowledge of myself that I am not prepared for. It can be traumatic. We are entirely capable of coming to knowledge about ourselves and our world with coming to information and then misusing that knowledge and misusing that information. In the same way, again, the sort of the weight loss example works here with regards to spiritual and mental health. Who I become along the way earns me the right to be the person when I get there. So if I take a massive shortcut to get to a deep, deep knowledge of myself or come to some point of psychological clarity, etc., I just won't assume. I just can't begin to assume that that I'm going to be responsible to that knowledge. Maybe you've already been there in your life in which you've come to a knowledge of something that you're just not prepared for. And it's harder now than when you had a lack of clarity. Is it better to live in the dark about yourself? Y'all, sometimes it is, because you haven't really earned it. Sometimes it's better to live in the dark about things. Sometimes it's better to live in the tension about things. I'll come back to that. I think it's really possible. This is how I wrote it, the Substack. It's entirely possible to come to an emotional, spiritual knowledge of myself and my world that I'm not at all prepared to wisely engage. Part of how I become prepared is by doing the long, hard, often disappointing work that not only deepens my appreciation for the end of my process, but helps me detach myself from what might otherwise be an obsession with results. If I'm chasing results with regards to my mental health, even if that result is like some sort of like peace in my mind, if I'm just chasing peace, I'm going to bypass the processes by which like I earn the right, by which I become someone who can live at peace. If I'm chasing result, I'm going to bypass my becoming. Meanwhile, just about every time I hear a lot of excitement, this is the other piece. Just about every time I hear a lot of excitement about something, it makes me nervous. So, like, we get excited about tools the way sports fans get excited about sports. I used to be a sports fan, so I know this. Excitement about a thing sometimes blinds us from the potential pitfalls and problems of that thing, right? So, again, this is a terrible example, and that's what might make it great. It's just a really cheap example. It's like someone who's a really diehard fan of a team will overlook all kinds of issues with that team, with their win-loss record, with, they'll make excuses for losses, or they'll honestly just like not pay attention to the way that team is screwing the city that they play the sport in. Excitement about a thing blinds us to warnings and to red flags. And with psilocybin use and with the use of AI, I'm seeing that all over the place. There's so much excitement about like what these things can potentially do, about the power of these things, and I think that excitement can oftentimes blind us to the longer, harder, slower process in which we recognize like, we detach ourselves from like the end of the thing. Like, this is what it's going to do for me. And I can actually pay attention to like what might not be great about it. Which brings me to this piece. And I think I want to land the plane here, because this is really like the thing underneath the thing. I'm nervous for friends who are using psilocybin. I'm nervous for friends whose companies are diving super hard into use of AI, because I don't know. There's not been enough research. Not enough time has passed, with the use of these things for us to know like the difference between what's good and bad. And that's a long, hard experiment to submit ourselves to. But underneath that is this. Part of why Scott Erickson and I wrote this book is because we actually think there's value in pain, and there's value in disillusionment. There's value in failure, and I don't mean that in some sort of cute way that is contextualized by victory. That if I suffer, then I'll learn to get better, and if I learn to get better, then I have more victory. I actually think on the existential level that there's something good and valuable and beautiful about being a human being that is only arrived at, only celebrated, only known in failure and disappointment and in loss. And the excitement around and the use of psilocybin and AI, a lot of it screams of a desire to bypass some of the harder parts of life. But I think some of the harder parts of life are some of the good parts of life. This is how I wrote it here. Part of why Scott Erickson and I co-wrote the book In the Low is as an attempt to try living more completely and more wholly. The low, which is the place from which we tend to reach for shortcuts like new tech or powerful drugs. The low is in and of itself a gift. It teaches us to be human rather than simply successful. The low can help us draw ourselves away from the culturally trained propensity to predicate our happiness and our humanity on the achievement of goals and on getting things done, especially on getting things done quickly. Friends, life is hard and painful, but I think that's part of what makes it good. Underneath all of this for me is a narrative in which the good life is a life that moves faster and achieves more. The good life is a life in which there is less pain. I don't know that that's true. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not. I don't think the good life is a life in which there is less pain. I don't think the good life is a life in which there's less struggle. I don't think the good life is a life in which there's less strife or trying or failure. I think the good life is a life that includes all those things. And in order for me to actually receive my life as good, part of what I need to do is actually acquaint myself with failure and with pain and with struggle and with disappointment. I get it. I think there is a place for the use of tools that make things easier. But again, I'll read from the bottom of this because I think I said it more clearly here. I do believe there's room for the use of AI and psilocybin and tools like that. I really, really do. But perhaps that place is in the context of lives marked by pain and shaped by struggle, in the hands of people who value the fruits they have because they worked for them, period. I hope this is helpful. These are still thoughts I'm wrestling through and working with. I'd love to hear what you think about these thoughts. What do you think about my thoughts? But more to the point, I'm hoping to give language here on this podcast for the conversation we're in about these tools, because they are powerful and they're making a massive difference in a lot of people's lives, maybe even yours. These are turbulent waters, and turbulent waters get murky. And I think there might be landmines out here when it comes to psilocybin and AI. And I want us to be more careful because I care about who you are. I care about who you are in what you're doing. And I think who you are is what makes what you're doing worth doing. So until next time.